Draft is 3 weeks from tomorrow night in Kansas City, and that's how we turn to our in-studio guest to kick off hour number 2 from Fox Sports and The Athletic. A fascinating conversation upcoming from a mock draft from a guy who picked a lot of brains at many different levels of football. Bruce Feldman, good to see you, sir.
Good to see you.
Okay, so let's jump right into it. Who did you speak to that you can let me know? How many folks did you call your information from to come up with your mock draft?
It was probably close to 50 college coaches, and then there was a handful of people that I talked to on the NFL side for added context.
Sure.
But really what I try to do with my mock draft is there's a lot of good draft analysts, and I think you probably work with the best one in Daniel. But what I'm trying to do is give fans a sense from who the players are, what the coaches who faced them thought. So they've scouted them, they've studied a lot of tape, they've game planned against them, and then when the game has happened, they know exactly what they're trying to do to those players, and they see the results. They know what their personnel is like. So I think it's a different perspective maybe than some other people have on who these draft prospects are.
Well, again, 3 weeks from tomorrow night, we are going to get an answer to the question is, who did the Carolina Panthers trade all the way up from 9 to number 1 to go get? And right now, the general consensus is it's C.J. Stroud. And fascinatingly enough, going into the combine, we all thought it was going to be Bryce Young. That was when the Bears were still sitting there, and we were wondering who they might trade the draft pick to. Walk me through why Stroud is atop your mock draft board.
His accuracy is at the elite level. There are guys who I talked to who've been longtime college coaches who face a lot of good quarterbacks. They think he's the most accurate quarterback they've ever played against in terms of ball placement and some of the throws he makes. He's got good size. I think people maybe don't realize he played at Ohio State often over 220 pounds. He's 6'3". The Ohio State coaches were effusive for a long time about how football smart he is, what he can see. He's a good athlete. I don't think that gets talked about enough because he's been so good as a passer. He followed a great athlete in Justin Fields. But the people I talked to, and you can see this in the piece we did on The Athletic, they felt like, hey, maybe the guy he followed, we're not sure how well he saw it. There's no questions about CJ and how he sees it. The other thing is
it being the defense that he's trying to beat.
Yeah, and the biggest thing that I think, he played the closest thing to NFL caliber talent that you're going to see in college football in his last time out against Georgia in the playoff, and he lit them up, right? And so I think people saw how well he moved in there. They saw his playmaking ability, and to me, he checks every box in a big way, whereas Bryce Young, a lot of people, there's a lot to love there, but the reality is he's still 5'10"-ish, 195 pounds or so, and I think there are legitimate concerns about just durability from a long-term standpoint with him. There's a lot to love about Bryce, but to me, there isn't really anything you can be that worried about with CJ, whereas Bryce, the durability piece of this, look, he's not Kyler Murray, but Kyler Murray didn't finish the year last year, and Kyler Murray is a lot more dynamic athlete. They're different quarterbacks, but they're both smaller guys, and Kyler Murray's actually a little thicker than Bryce is at this point.
Well, I mean, in the conversation I heard about Bryce Young at the Combine, and again, this is when he was viewed as the first overall pick in the draft. That was before C.J. Stroud threw it around. And it's kind of funny how, wow, look at you throwing in the, at the Combine against no defenses.
Routes on air, yeah.
Right, and look how beautiful you throw a ball. As if we didn't see the game against Georgia, right? And that now is something that puts him atop everyone's draft board. But the conversation about Bryce Young, Bruce, was that I was hearing is name me a moment on film, on tape, in the SEC for Nick Saban and Alabama where his size was a detriment. Name me a moment where he didn't get up. Name me a moment where his durability was in question. And there were fewer and far between, and in terms of his size being a difference snap to snap, you couldn't really even point to one that he has a unique ability to overcome that, for the lack of a better phrase.
The one thing that did come up a little bit with some of the SEC coaches I talked to, look at what he played against LSU this year. He did not have this past year. He did not have a great game, and LSU has some elite, bigger athletes who can run, and that gave him a little more trouble than maybe some of these other defenses did. So I think, yes, I think he's a legit top 5 caliber player. But I think if you're talking about separating the two, If I was the Panthers, based on all I've heard, all I knew, I think it's just he's a lot safer pick, right? Lots of guys never get hurt until they get to play against, the different caliber human beings in the NFL all the time, not just, once out of every 5 games or so.
Bruce Feldman here from Fox Sports and The Athletic. Check out on The Athletic, Bruce Feldman's mock draft, culled from speaking to multiple sources at both levels. You have Anthony Richardson going to the Colts at 4. And Richardson, we had him on the Monday after the draft. After the combine. And he gave a fascinating answer to the ultimate knock with him right now, which is, what do you do at Florida? Right? I mean, the wins and were not there in the year prior, obviously, to him coming out in the draft. And he gave an interesting answer without trying to throw other people under the bus. But he puffed his chest out and said he still did it at the SEC level for Florida. What do you hear from that level about what happened in Florida, where he isn't coming off of such a monster season but has had such a monster evaluation season?
There's stuff to love in terms of the physical tools, obviously, and the way he can run. He looked really good in the opener against a good Utah team, right? But then after that, it was really inconsistent. I think when people look at him, they're obviously seeing what they think he can be as opposed to what he is. There was a new system last year. There wasn't great talent around him at Florida. I think the comparisons to Cam Newton, to me, I wouldn't be comfortable with, because Cam Newton had 1 year at Auburn. He won a national title. He's arguably the greatest college football player I've ever covered. And he put them on his back, that whole program. There was really only one other big-time guy on that team, and that was Nick Fairley, a defensive lineman. The rest of the guys around him, they weren't draft picks. They were like free agent types. And again, I mean, what he did was remarkable. The Josh Allen comparison, I do give some credence to. Both guys completed around mid 50%. And obviously, one played in the Mountain West at Wyoming, the other one played at Florida. So the competition level, I think, was certainly higher for Anthony Richardson. Also, when Josh Allen played the few games he did against Power 5 opponents, he did not look very good. But he went to a system with Brian Daboll, who accentuated the things he did really well, obviously running, the types of reads they gave him, but also the way they used his legs. And then you see even what Daboll did with the Giants and Daniel Jones, who had his best year. We saw him use his legs. I think the reason why I like the fit with him to the Colts, Shane Steichen, who just had Jalen Hurts, and they really brought him along really well and used his legs. I think there's the stuff they can do with Anthony Richardson, because, again, the intel I got was people at Florida really like his intangibles. There's a lot to build on. Should he have come out, or should he have stayed another year? I don't know. If he's going to be a top 5 pick and you get to your second contract, as long as, you feel like you're going to go to a good place, I mean, it is definitely a risk, but there were no guarantees. Next year's quarterback draft might be better than this one, because you have Caleb Williams and Drake May likely to be in it. And those guys probably have, they don't have the size question on Bryce, or, they're bigger guys, or at least Drake May is certainly bigger. And I think, maybe he would have been cracked the first pick. But if you're going to be a top 10 pick, as long as it doesn't really adversely affect your development, I think that's key where he goes.
Well, and you would think that the guy who coordinated Jalen Hurts to such a remarkable season this year would be the perfect guy to have Anthony Richardson in his arsenal.
And he had Justin Herbert as a rookie and did a really nice job. Justin Herbert, played a lot more, and I think had less accuracy concerns, but also a big, really mobile guy, and they took advantage of what he did really well and brought him along nicely.
Bruce Feldman here on the Rich Eisen Show. You have Will Levis dropping way out of the top 10. You have him going all the way down to 20, and we'll reveal right there that it's to Tennessee. And it's interesting that we mentioned this now, because your mock draft does include trades. So you've got the Giants trading all the way up to 12 to select Oregon's corner, a terrific player in Christian Gonzalez, probably trying to beat, as you point out in your article, the Patriots to the punch, knowing Bill. You have the Giants trading all the way up to 12, and you have the Titans, I guess, trading back into the first round to get Will Levis?
Yeah, I think that the interesting part is, it's like, who do we have to beat out to get to these guys? I think there will be a cluster of corners that are coming. To me, this is maybe the best position in the draft. I think there are a lot of really good corners. And look, if Julius Brents from K-State doesn't go in the first round, he is a first-round caliber athlete. He's longer than all those guys. He's got really good change of direction. He's really physical. And so, I don't know, based on the people I talked to, at least the coaches, there was much more, there was almost a sense of awe about Devin Witherspoon from Illinois.
Who, by the way, just ran a 4.40 apparently. Daniel Jeremiah saying that's what happened at the Illinois Pro Day today.
Yeah, I think be loved by somebody the way Daniel loves the Illinois corner, right?
That's right, exactly.
But he's super instinctive and he is really physical, much like he plays like he's Patrick Peterson size. But I think Christian Gonzalez, because he's longer, he's bigger, he has more straight line speed. I don't know if he's been as consistent and maybe showed to be as instinctive or the playmaker that Witherspoon was last year. But I do think people are going to look at him as, we don't want to miss out on this run on corners. That's why the Giants moving. As far as the Titans, I think their first move is to go try to get Jackson Smith-Njigba if he's there. I think he is clearly the best receiver in this draft. And for context, they had Ohio State produced 2 first-round receivers last year. Obviously, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson. Both guys had terrific rookie years. They both were 1,000-yard receivers. And almost all the coaches I talked to who played all those guys thought Jackson Smith-Njigba is a better player than those guys are.
Yes.
Better change of direction, more physical, better size, and I think he's a really good fit for the Titans. The reason why I have them jumping back up is because I think Levis could be a good fit there. You have Ryan Tannehill, 35, a little banged up the last couple of years, and also this is the last year of his deal. I think it would be a good situation for Levis to go in there. He is a polarizing guy to some degree, like Anthony Richardson. Both guys, elite arm strength, good athletes. He runs well, obviously not as well as Anthony Richardson, but very inconsistent. His first year as a starter there, he came in after spring ball, so he didn't have time to acclimate. Liam Cohen was the new offensive coordinator, and he had a terrific year. Then last year, Liam Cohen goes back to the NFL. They lose a bunch of good offensive linemen and Wan'Dale Robinson. And people can see from what I was told by the coaches, just they felt like he was kind of seeing ghosts. They didn't feel like he was as accurate, or maybe had trusted what he was doing. Mm-hmm. The system wasn't as good. I get why there is a little bit of concern with him. Probably, like I said, the same with Richardson, but maybe not as high of a potential.
Okay, and then if we look at the top 10, you have the Raiders, where a lot of people are penciling Will Levis in. You have them choosing Paris Johnson as the first offensive lineman off the board out of Ohio State. So you think that Will Levis is on the board, they're going to go with protecting Jimmy G or whomever they're going to get at some point, that's their first order of business for the Vegas Raiders?
I would think so. I don't think you bring in Jimmy Garoppolo to take somebody else who it's not like, I don't think the Raiders are going to look at him and go, okay, if we had the first pick in the draft, we got to take him. I think you have to, shore up your offensive line just that much more. Now, look, if they feel really confident on the left side, they could end up going for somebody else and then say, hey, we can take, there's a really good, Darnell Wright, there's a really good right tackle from Tennessee who I don't think goes in the first 20 picks because he's a right tackle. But everybody in the SEC I spoke to loved him. They thought he was a nasty, really physical road grader who moves better than you think. And if they wanted right tackle, maybe they go someplace else, or they drop down to try to get him, because I don't think you're taking a right tackle in the top 10.
Okay. And then, because again, you have some trades, as we've just established, the Giants moving up to 12 to take Wilkins out of Oregon, right?
Sorry, Christian Gonzalez.
Pardon me, out of Oregon, and then Titans moving up to take Will Levis. And again, this may just be a gut feel mock draft thing, but in case you have gotten some information that you're willing to share, You don't think anybody's going to trade up with the Cardinals at 3, and they're just going to take Willie Anderson? You don't think there's going to be some sort of Godfather offer of somebody for Anthony Richardson, knowing the Colts are sitting out there?
If I am the Cardinals, I am not I think he might be the surest thing in this draft. He is such a good player. Will Anderson plays so hard. Was really productive. If you can get him, I think you regret not taking him. I don't know what kind of package somebody would give, but if you're talking about packaging that somebody else's first with a second and a fourth or something, I'm sorry. I think Will Anderson is going to be an all-pro numerous times over, and I think he is exactly what they need in terms of to upgrade their defense and really change kind of the demeanor of the place. I think he's that good of a player.
Well, and this is going to be like one of the best games of chicken I can recall in recent drafts here, where the Colts will have to sit there and think if they really, really want Richardson. Let's just assume that. I know what assuming can be. But just maybe flipping something to Arizona to just move up one and just remove all doubt. Then Arizona can move down, get some more picks, and still get Will Anderson. Or if somebody's jonesing for the mother load for Arizona would be they trade from 3 down to 4 and then trade out again. Unless they love Will Anderson so damn much, they can do that. I'm just wondering, what are you hearing before we'll take a break, if you don't mind, and we'll hit some other things. What are you hearing about the Richardson buzz that somebody will just go for it and get him at 3 to beat the Colts to the punch?
There's definitely a quarterback coach in the NFL I've talked to who says that's their number one guy on their board because he just has
Richardson.
Unreal physical tools to work with. But he is a project in terms of what you have to do with him. So, having said that, I mean, obviously anything can happen once you get closer to it. I just come back to Will Anderson, though. I mean, this guy was the best defensive football player in college football the last couple of years. And his motor never stops. He's really good against the run. He's really physical. You pass on him, you better get somebody who's going to be a potential Hall of Famer, I think. Because I think he could be, if you ask me, and I remember I did this project a couple of years ago where it was my mock draft, and I went back and looked at it a couple of years ago when Micah Parsons was there, and one of the guys I talked to uses the term, he's a future Hall of Famer. If it's short of Micah Parsons, I'm not sure how many in the last couple of years defensive, front 7 guys, I would be like, yeah, you can't, if you have the chance to take this guy, unless you desperately need a quarterback, desperately. I don't know how you let him go.
Bruce Feldman sticking around here from The Athletic and Fox Sports, but The Athletic piece with his mock draft is just fascinating. You have Jaylen Carter at 5 to Seattle, and it's very difficult when you're as talented as Jaylen Carter to have a pro day as poor as the one that he supposedly had. That's all I'm hearing is he looked out of shape. He looked uninterested. That's what you hear. Then you hear stories that he's taken off of draft boards. Okay, I find that one hard to believe, but there is the reason why he left the combine as well, facing charges locally about somebody being killed in what appears to be
two people in a car accident.
In a car accident. So there's everything together. And then, this is my long windup, Drew Rosenhaus tells our friend Adam Schefter, hey, we're only visiting teams that have a top 10 pick. So if there's anybody out there saying he's falling out of the top 10, guess what? You're out of the top 10. You're falling out of the Jaylen Carter business, which is a fascinating way to spin things. What are you hearing about Jaylen Carter right now as we're sitting here almost 3 weeks before the draft?
I think there may be some teams that will take him off their board, and I think there will be a lot of other teams who will say this guy is just too gifted for us to pass on an opportunity. You're going to see him at a value. The fact that he would not be in the top 4. The people I talked to said when they watched Georgia in 2021, that was a defense that had 3 first-round defensive linemen, including the first pick of the draft. This was the most talented of all of them. This guy was. And the issues off the field, I think, are legitimate concerns. But how many times have we seen the NFL have character questions on guys and give those guys a second chance or another chance. One of the people he's been compared to for a long time is a former colleague of yours, Warren Sapp. They're from the same place. They grew up in the same place. Like Warren Sapp, he basically was a tight end before he really became a defensive lineman. Warren Sapp fell in the draft. I don't think the team that drafted him felt like they regretted taking him. They won a Super Bowl.
I should say he's in their Ring of Honor.
Yeah, so I think people look at him and Carter and be like, there's nobody else like him in this draft, and there isn't. There's a bunch of good quarterbacks. I think there's a bunch of really good cornerbacks, and there's some good edge rushers. There's nobody in there like him. I mean, Pete Carroll gets him, and if he's right, and there's an if, but is he Cortez Kennedy for them? I mean, Cortez Kennedy did not have the character question marks, but he was, he came from junior college. He was, when he got to Miami, and then he kind of exploded in that last year. It's a different, he had a different arc than what Jaylen Carter has had. But if you get Jaylen Carter, and all of a sudden now Jaylen Carter feels like he's got a chip on his shoulder because he wants to prove something, look out, because you name the coach who played him, they're all like, if he didn't want to be blocked, nobody was blocking him. He was just different.
So what are you hearing out of Georgia about the charges that he is facing? What do you know about that you can share?
Right now there are misdemeanors. I think there are some concerns just from a maturity standpoint. One of the things you had heard was just like, the guy who coached him, the D-line coach, was like, look, he has a chip on his shoulder, but a lot of defensive linemen do. And they did not have, from the people I talked to there, like big red flags on him.
They did not have red flags on him.
At Georgia, no. Now, there was definitely some maturity challenges that they were navigating. But honestly, Georgia did not. That's one of the few places that was so stacked in the D-line room. If Jaylen Carter was going to be such a locker room problem, I really do believe they would not have kept him around, and he would not have played. Now, he did play this past year with a high ankle. He hurt it almost in the beginning of the game against Oregon. And I think 2022's film was not as impressive as 2021 because, like I said, he was not healthy for a bunch of it. But I just think you look at the stuff that he is capable of doing and has done, he's going to be tough to pass up if you're the Seahawks sitting there at number 5 and you're looking to say, hey, we can get a dominant defensive lineman who you look at who's playing in the Super Bowl, whether you have, Chris Jones or Fletcher Cox or some of these guys who previously, he's not Aaron Donald because he's different size, but elite defensive linemen are not that easy to find that they're that much of a difference maker.
Bruce Feldman, Fox Sports, The Athletic here on the Rich Eisen Show. So you believe the Seahawks will use the choice they have at 5 that they got in the Russell Wilson trade on Jaylen Carter, and then we already established in our previous segment that you think the Titans will trade up to 20 to use
trade back up,
trade back up into the draft from the second round back into the first round to take Will Levis at 20. That is Seattle's current spot with their own pick. And I find it interesting that Pete Carroll was talking on this show that, hey, we're not going to be in the top 5 very often. We don't plan on being back there. We're going to kick tires on quarterbacks, and they got Geno Smith signed for a couple of years. So you think they're going to trade out of that spot maybe to allow someone else to take Will Levis, and that team that takes Will Levis will take that spot because in the next third of the draft of the first round, you have the Vikings using their first-round pick on Hendon Hooker. What gives you the sense that the Vikings are going to go use a first-round pick with Kirk Cousins, obviously, at the end of his current deal, for the kid coming back from an ACL injury here? What do you think?
The buzz, I think, on Hendon Hooker is really going way up. When I was in Indy, I had lunch with a quarterback coach in the NFL, and I said, who really impressed you in the meetings? And usually a lot of guys do because that's how it's scripted it is kind of. But he was like, loved Hendon Hooker. His demeanor was great. Not only did he have great knowledge of what they did at Tennessee, he had great knowledge of what they did at his previous place, Virginia Tech, why they called things, different things. and was just kind of wowed by him. And then when I started talking to more people about him, he was the guy who probably one of maybe 3 or 4 who you'd hear people who were just gushing about in terms of loved his pocket presence, thought he saw it well. We get it that the offense they run is very different. It is what Josh Heupel does is kind of comes from the Art Briles Baylor system. And there are some, like the routes are different. The routes aren't really even routes. It's just, half field reads. And there's a lot of stuff that I think you're gonna have to project with him. But he has played in another system. He did learn this. He not only did he learn it, Tennessee football has been in a ditch for like 15 years. Hendon Hooker was a big reason why not only they get out of it, they had a top 10 season. They beat Alabama. At one point, he was the Heisman front runner. And yes, he is coming off an ACL, but if he goes to the Vikings, you don't need him to come in and play right away. I think he can get acclimated. Kevin O'Connell, we know, is good with quarterbacks. We know the structure there should be good. There's good young receivers. I think he is that would be an ideal spot for him. And people I've talked to think Hendon Hooker, it wouldn't surprise them if he went above Will Levis. I mean, they like him that much and they're intrigued by him. Yes, it's going to be a projection with his offense, what he did, but he has time. He's not going to be battling for the job right away.
Right. So what's the sense of when he could be ready? Is this year a wash for him, or what are you hearing?
I think it's a wash, but I at one point somebody told me they thought, maybe by midseason he could be ready to go if need be. But I don't think you're taking him knowing, because if you're putting somebody in at that point, your season's probably, especially when you're drafting there,
yes,
you're not expecting to make win the last 5 games and then get hot and go into the playoff. I imagine you just want him to really get acclimated to what they do in the NFL and keep developing, because you think his potential is what these other coaches who've played him think. I mean, they just really were high on him.
Bruce Feldman here on the Rich Eisen Show. In the few minutes I have left with you, I know you already mentioned next year's draft. There's Caleb Williams, there's Drake May. But I want to talk about last year's draft for a brief bit with you, even though I know we're talking about the current draft and maybe the future draft based on your mock draft. But the reason why I want to bring up Desmond Ritter and Sam Howell to you is both Atlanta and Washington appeared to be saying, we're in on these guys we drafted last year, instead of going for broke, literally and maybe figuratively, and literally on Lamar Jackson. So what about these two guys, Ritter and Howell, makes you think these are the right choices now? And I know there's cap choices, and I know that there's everything else with Lamar. He didn't finish the last 2 seasons. But these are 2 kids that got drafted in the 2nd and, I believe, 5th round, respectively, by their teams last year. I mean, what was your knowledge about them coming in that makes you think, okay, they might be ready in 2023 with a huge amount of pressure based on what the teams didn't do to give them the opportunities this year?
I'm not sold on Desmond Ritter. I that one, it's like, he was pretty good in a lot of things. I don't, I think he ran faster than what people at the combine than I think what people saw on film. Mm-hmm. He was a really good player on a team that kept on getting better and better at Cincinnati. But I am a little hesitant on that one. I know Washington really likes Sam Howell, and he had a prolific career at UNC, but again, this is a guy who, as much as they liked him, they still took him in the 5th round. I think they're in a position where it's like, all right, we're going to give this year to say it's almost like a make or break year for you. And then if you do not wow us or do not sell us in the first, 6 weeks of the season, we got to be looking and saying, I mean, if I'm Washington, I know, maybe ownership doesn't necessarily think like this, but if he does not convince you that he is going to be a franchise quarterback, you're doing everything you can to bring Caleb Williams, who is from Washington, D.C., home. And I think at that point you're saying, that's our guy. Because if you're them and you're looking and saying Will Levis, you're not taking Hendon Hooker in terms of if you're Washington.
Yes.
Because you need somebody to play now. If you're going to take a quarterback.
Yeah, they're sitting at 16.
Yeah, so I in that regard, I don't know if Washington do you do everything you can to move up in the top 4? I don't know what you're giving up at that point.
Lamar. You want to talk about somebody who's playing football in the Mid-Atlantic. You know what I mean? Like, that's the point. And they didn't even apparently twitch in that direction. And you mentioned ownership. It does appear, who knows, ownership may change. You want to talk about handing the keys to a Ferrari like, Ferris Bueller here. I mean, they've got Terry McLaurin. They've got Curtis Samuel. They've got Jahan Dotson, a whole bunch of Big Ten players that are now becoming grown-ass men.
That's better skill talent than what Lamar has had.
That's what I'm saying. That's why I'm saying you take Lamar and you put him there. But Sam Howell is a guy that didn't have much talent around him in his senior year or his last year.
But he had a ton around him early in his career. Now he was prolific, but the Lamar thing puzzles me too. And I had a conversation with somebody I know really well who is on one of these teams that needs a quarterback, I think. And this person is not a decision maker when it comes to that.
Uh-huh.
And I was just like, to me, go do everything you can to get Lamar. I mean, whether Lamar can be Lamar 5 years from now, maybe that's another conversation. But I just think if you want to be a Super Bowl contender, you add him into, you see what he has done, and he's still young. Like, he's not much older than Hendon Hooker. I mean, it's true. Like, I don't know what the math is on there. He might be a year and a half older than Hendon Hooker. I'm sure Twitter can explain why there's a lot of skepticism on Lamar and why you don't, I don't get. I think when you see what he's done in the NFL with what's been around him.
Yes.
I'm talking about franchise guy. I mean, I don't know. I think it would rejuvenate, a down, especially if you haven't won in a while. Get your fan base excited. He is an exciting player. I don't know. I don't understand why he is not getting treated the way I think he has earned it.
In the last couple minutes I have with you, Bruce Feldman, a moment for me here. We're sitting on this show, what was it, last week? Looked up at ESPN. There was a young man with his family around him. And he chose Michigan, Jaden Davis. Okay.
Always comes back to me.
No, hold on. Again, and this is where I'm going with it. Hold on. Is that Harbaugh, 2 years in a row now, has come this close to going back to the NFL, it feels. He literally, on a signing day 2 years ago, was talking to the Vikings on a signing day, okay? And this past year, I mean, it was as red hot as possible after he said, people are going to be so upset when I come back to Michigan, and then he's talking to the Broncos. I mean, it was wild. And for all us in the Michigan fan base, we're like, he's just going to ruin it when it comes to recruiting. Who's going to come? And this kid chooses Michigan over Clemson and North Carolina and another school that escapes me off the top of my head. And he says the reason why he's going is because of Harbaugh. He wants to run through a wall for him. So what gives? How is this just continuing on? I'm not complaining about it. It's just wild to me.
I feel like there is more buzz right now around them recruiting wise than there has been since he's been there, right? And part of that is because you've kicked the butts of Ohio State in back-to-back years. People saw that. The fact that he's still there. This will be his most talented team he's ever had in Ann Arbor. I think they're really, really interesting because they had all these kids, Blake Corum most notably, because, we know the story about running backs and their shelf life. I am fascinated to see what Michigan football looks like in 2023 because, they didn't, you and I were both in the building when they lost to TCU. I think the biggest challenge for Jim Harbaugh is being some of the people who he really leaned on to push back on him at times in the last couple of years are not there anymore. But the talent is really, really good now. I think the Big Ten East is going to be wild because Ohio State, you have to replace CJ, but there's, it's still Ohio State. They've still recruited incredibly well.
Right.
You have Penn State. They love their young quarterback, Drew Aller, who's taken over. They just want to, this should be a really scary Penn State team. So now you have three teams who feel like they are legit playoff contenders. I think Jim Harbaugh is going to be really interesting to watch this year.
So He doesn't skip a beat, even though he's made. I mean, you could say footsie or whatever. To the
he
NFL,
defies logic. He is so unusual. Is not the nicest way to put it, but like when he wins, it's hard for people to understand. Like, why was he able to do what he did at Stanford? It's one of the greatest coaching turnaround jobs that anybody has done in college football in the last, at least in my lifetime. And then he went to Michigan and he got them better. And then he kind of plateaued. And then all of a sudden, we talked a lot about what they did to kind of hit the gas and plow up the hill. And they did. And now it's like they're on a different level. Can they win a national title? He's shown he can be the bully of the Big Ten, and that matters. Now can they, and these are the kind of kids and these are kind of recruiting battles you need to win if you're going to make a run at a national title. And think about the teams now that have to replace key guys. I mean, Georgia's positioned well to make a run at doing something nobody's ever done in college football, which is win 3 in a row. Alabama not only has to replace its starting quarterback Bryce, they have to replace the best player in the program or the best defensive player in the program, Will Anderson. I mean, the team, no CJ at Ohio State. There are definite question marks of all the teams that you think are like, oh yeah, but they're there. So I don't know. If there was a year when Jim Harbaugh could win a national title at Michigan, man, this is the one that it shapes up.
And there's USC out here, though. I mean, there's Caleb Williams. You want to talk about the number 1 overall pick in next year's draft? You could pretty much say, knock on wood, he stays healthy. That's it. I mean,
they just need to get a lot better on defense.
They couldn't tackle Utah,
and they were physically not ready to play, defense against really physical teams. And I think they'll get better. They have to get a lot better.
Thanks for this. This is great, man. Appreciate it. I could truly fill another hour with you, but I won't because I know you got to coach your kids. So thanks again, Bruce. Appreciate it. Everybody check out Bruce Feldman's mock draft 1.0. You going to do a 2.0 or this is it?
No, this is it. This is it. I may do a draft confidential, but this is it.
So you still call it 1.0?
I don't think I did. I think he did.
Okay, very good. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern for free.